Hey guys, tonight we are stepping straight into the fog-drenched streets of Victorian London. The lamps glow faintly through the soot in the air, and the cobblestones beneath your boots are slick from yesterday's rain. A carriage clatters by and you clutch your coat tighter, because already, before you've even spoken a word, the society around you is sizing you up. They're deciding if you belong. The truth? You probably won't survive this. At least not without accidentally insulting someone's mother-in-law or forgetting to bow at precisely the right angle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you're listening. It's always fascinating to see this little sleepy community stretch across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward into the heart of the 19th century, where rules and rituals stretch across every aspect of life like iron fences. Nothing is casual here. Your accent, your posture, even the thickness of your gloves can decide whether you are whispered about as respectable or dismissed as vulgar. Victorian society thrives on performance, and you are the newest, most awkward actor shoved onto the stage. The first impression begins the moment your boots strike the pavement. Clothes aren't just clothes, they are coded announcements speaking on your behalf before you open your mouth. Historians still argue whether the Victorians were genuinely obsessed with morality, or whether morality was just a convenient excuse to keep everyone in their proper place. Either way, tonight you're gonna feel it. You duck into a hallway lined with dark polished wood. A mirror stares back at you, and you can't help but notice your collar. It must be stiff, starched until it could slice bread. If it droops, you'll look like a careless tradesman. If it's too tall, you'll appear like a ridiculous dandy, the sort of fellow Punch magazine loves to mock. Somewhere in between lies safety. A hostess sweeps toward you, all silks and faint perfume. Do you bow? Of course you bow, but not too low, that would be servile. Not too quick, that would be dismissive. A gentle dip of the head, with the eyes still meeting hers, suggests confidence without arrogance. You can feel the weight of everyone else in the room watching, though they pretend not to. This is the reality of Victorian social life. Each gesture is a test. The mainstream fact is clear. Manuals of etiquette sold like hotcakes in this era. Entire publishing houses churned out thick guides instructing middle-class drivers exactly how to behave. Emily Post hadn't yet written her famous rules, but her Victorian predecessors were already drilling people in the exhausting choreography of life. Quirky tidbit? Some etiquette guides even included diagrams of how to sit in a chair, because apparently your choice of spine angle could decide if you were trustworthy. One manual suggested that men must never spread the legs beyond a modest stance, lest the mind be assumed equally lax. You shift uncomfortably in your seat. Are your knees too far apart? Probably. And here's the funny thing, you don't even get a break in private. Imagine hosting a friend for tea, thinking you can finally relax. But no. Even the way you pour the tea is a battlefield. There are whole debates, still unresolved today, over whether the milk goes in before the tea or after. Historians still argue whether milk first was just about preserving fragile porcelain from cracking, or if it was a secret class marker separating the aristocrats from the merely aspiring. The irony, of course, is that while you're sweating over how many degrees to bow or how to hold your teacup, the city around you is filthy, loud, and chaotic. Outside, coal dust is staining every surface, cholera lurks in the Thames, and children are selling matches barefoot in the mud. Yet somehow, the priority in this glittering drawing room is whether you remembered to remove your hat precisely 2 seconds after entering. So here you are, the newcomer, trapped in a dance you never rehearsed. You can feel your shoulders stiffen, your breath grow shallow, because you know the truth. One slip, one laugh at the wrong moment, one overly enthusiastic handshake, and you're done for. The ladies will whisper, the gentlemen will snicker, and your name will drift around town like soot in the fog. You glance again at the mirror, straighten your collar, lift your chin. Congratulations. You've survived the first impression? Barely. You've made it through the doorway, chin high, collar crisp, and you're still breathing. But the relief is short-lived, because now the real judgment begins: your clothes. In Victorian society, garments aren't just fabric, they're declarations, tiny manifestos stitched onto your body. Every cuff, button, and hem length whispers who you are, or who you're pretending to be. Imagine stepping into a parlor. You think you look fine. Your coat's not threadbare, your boots are polished, and your hat hasn't been sat on recently. Yet already, eyes are scanning you like detectives with magnifying glasses. That jacket, is it wool broadcloth or some cheaper imitation? Are your gloves soft kid leather or a suspiciously stiff variety that suggests a bargain bin purchase? Your audience may not say a word, but they're filing you away, ranking you with ruthless precision. Mainstream fact: the Victorians were obsessed with dress codes because clothing acted as a visual passport into society. The upper classes changed outfits multiple times a day, each wardrobe shift timed with events: morning attire, afternoon dress, dinner wear, evening gowns. For a man, this meant juggling frock coats, waistcoats, and ties in more varieties than you'd care to count. For a woman, it meant corsets drawn tight enough to realign your organs. Comfort was never the point, signaling status was. You tug at your collar and wonder how anyone survived this regime without fainting. Quirky tidbit: women sometimes sew tiny lead weights into their hemlines to keep skirts from flying up in a gust of wind. Sure, it solved the modesty issue, but it also meant lugging around an outfit that weighed more than a small dog. Fashion was fitness. And what about colors? Don't imagine you can just throw on something cheerful. Black communicates mourning, white is for debutantes, purple suggests luxury because the dye was expensive, and bright green, ironically, might slowly poison you thanks to arsenic-based pigments. You stand there in your chosen outfit, wondering if you're stylish or if you're quietly absorbing toxins. Historians still argue whether Victorians were fully aware of these dangers or simply so enamored with fashion that they chose elegance over health. Now, let's say you're ambitious, trying to climb the social ladder. You save up, purchase a tailored coat, maybe even invest in an opera cloak. But here's the catch: one mismatched detail can betray you. Wear evening gloves in the daytime? Scandal. Forget to swap your cravat for a white tie at dinner? Disaster. People will notice even if they pretend they don't. It's like arriving at a black tie wedding today in cargo shorts. You can't take it back. And heaven help you if you're a woman navigating the complexities of hats. Bonnets, veils, feathers, ribbons, each one comes with unwritten rules. A small bonnet might suggest respectability. An oversized, feather-stuffed creation might scream nouveau riche, trying too hard. You place one on your head and feel ridiculous either way. It's a no-win situation, and yet, you must smile serenely as if nothing is amiss. What makes this exhausting is that clothing isn't just about aesthetics, it's moral theater. Respectable dress proves you are self-controlled, virtuous, and aware of your place. A shabby hem could suggest laziness, while too much sparkle hints at vanity. The hypocrisy is hard to ignore. The coal magnate in his pristine tailcoat may have blackened half of northern England, but so long as his cuffs are snowy white, he's respectable. You, on the other hand, risk disgrace if your boots squeak. Outside, the gas lamps flicker, and you walk toward a waiting carriage. The driver glances at your attire before deciding how respectfully to address you. Even strangers on the street gauge your worth at a glance. The air smells faintly of horse manure and soot, but within these rules, everyone's nose is perpetually in the air. Here's your ironic reality check. You thought getting dressed was easy, but in Victorian society, your wardrobe is less a personal choice and more a social prison uniform. You pull at your gloves, straighten your cravat, and try to look as though you've never in your life worried about mismatched buttons. Congratulations, you're dressed. But whether you look like a gentleman or a punchline, that's another matter entirely. You've managed the outfit, survived the silent judgment of every button and hemline, but your ordeal isn't over. The next test arrives not on your body, but in your pocket, the calling card. It looks innocent enough, just a little rectangle of paper with your name elegantly printed. But don't be fooled. This slip of card is the golden ticket of Victorian social life, and mishandling it could exile you faster than a drunken uncle at Christmas dinner. Picture it. You approach a fine townhouse, gas lamps flickering against polished brass knockers. You straighten your cuffs, knock politely, and when the servant opens the door, you don't ask to come in. Oh no. You hand over your card. That's it. One small gesture, and your entire social fate hangs on what happens next. The servant places it on a silver tray, carries it into the drawing room, and somewhere inside, your potential host inspects it like a customs officer deciding whether to stamp your passport. Mainstream fact: calling cards were essential to Victorian society, especially in Britain's middle and upper classes. They weren't just introductions, they were silent auditions. A proper gentleman or lady never barged into someone's home unannounced. They left a card, waited to be invited, and only then dared to step across the threshold. It was a ritual of patience, hierarchy, and a little passive-aggressive exclusion. Now for the quirky tidbit: calling cards had their own secret code. If you folded down the top corner, it meant you'd come in person. Fold the bottom corner? That was a farewell. Fold the left edge? Congratulations on some happy event. Right edge folded? Condolences. Essentially, you were communicating through origami. Imagine the poor servants trying to remember all this without accidentally mixing up condolences with congratulations. You fumble yours nervously. Is your font too bold? Did you use the wrong weight of cardstock? Too thick and you look like a show-off. Too flimsy and you look like a pauper who printed at home. Historians still argue whether these details mattered as much as people claimed, or whether half of society was just pretending to care while secretly eyeing the refreshments. The absurdity is that your entire worth could be accepted or rejected based on whether your card felt right. It's the 19th century equivalent of being left on red. You hand over your little slip of paper and then wait. Sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks, to see if your invitation is returned. If nothing arrives, the message is clear: you don't belong. Imagine the humiliation. You'd show up to a party, dressed to the nines, only to realize your name wasn't on the list, because somewhere in a pile of cardstock, your card got pushed aside. One Victorian diarist even confessed that to neglect the card was to kill the acquaintance. That's right, your entire friendship could be erased by ignoring a rectangle of paper. Of course, some found ways to game the system. Clever climbers would deliver dozens of cards to the finest houses in town, hoping one would lead to an invitation. Others slipped them to servants with a wink and a coin, ensuring the card landed on the right desk. And still others forged connections by borrowing the stationery of friends, like social smuggling. But you're just trying to survive. You hand over your card, pray you folded the corner correctly, and step back into the street. The night air is cold, the fog smells faintly of coal smoke, and you realize your fate is now in the hands of a stranger sipping tea inside. And here's the kicker: you thought you were living your life, but in Victorian London, you're not just you. You're a piece of paper being shuffled around drawing rooms. Congratulations, you've entered the strange, silent battlefield of the calling card. And believe me, losing here stings far more than any spilled teacup. The card was accepted. You got the nod. Congratulations, you're officially invited inside. But don't breathe too easily, because crossing the threshold of a Victorian drawing room is like stepping onto a tightrope stretched over a canyon. One wrong move and you'll tumble into a pit of whispers and raised eyebrows. The way you walk, the way you stand, the way you greet the hostess, everything is a test. You stand before a door framed by heavy drapes, candlelight spilling around the edges. The servant announces your name, and just like that, you're on stage. Every pair of eyes flicks toward you. Do you shuffle awkwardly, hat in hand? Do you stride like a conquering hero? Neither will do. The correct answer is somewhere in between. Steady steps, posture upright, confidence without arrogance, humility without servility. Easy, right? Mainstream fact: drawing rooms were the heart of Victorian social life. These weren't just living rooms, they were theaters of status, where families displayed their taste, wealth, and refinement. The wallpaper, the china on the mantelpiece, even the placement of chairs was carefully arranged to impress visitors. To enter badly was to ruin the show before the curtain even rose. You pause at the doorway. Gentlemen are expected to bow slightly, ladies to offer a modest curtsy. Not too deep, that would look desperate. Not too shallow, that would seem dismissive. Your body must communicate that you belong without screaming that you know it. Easy to say, but when your knees suddenly feel like pudding, it's a little harder to pull off. Quirky tidbit, some etiquette guides of the period actually recommended practicing bows and curtsies in front of a mirror, much like you'd rehearse dance steps. Picture an aspiring social climber bending up and down repeatedly in their bedroom, muttering, "Not too much, not too little." It's both ridiculous and somehow necessary. The hostess approaches, gliding like she has invisible wheels beneath her gown. Do you kiss her hand? That depends. If she offers it, yes, lightly, barely brushing your lips to her glove. But heaven forbid you grab at it uninvited. That's grounds for scandal. Some manuals insisted the safest course was a gentle bow, letting her take the lead. After all, she's the director of the scene, and you're merely an extra hoping for more lines. And then comes the handshake. Or perhaps not. Historians still argue whether handshakes were considered too casual for high society. Among businessmen, they were common enough. But among the gentry, a handshake might be read as gauche, a gesture too eager, too American. Yes, even then Americans were accused of being overly friendly. You make your way further inside. The carpet muffles your steps. A fire crackles in the hearth, though the room somehow still feels chilly. Guests murmur in little clusters, cups of tea in hand, every smile carefully measured. The art here is to enter without disturbing the delicate balance. Too loud and you're branded uncouth. Too timid and you're invisible. The absurdity is hard to miss. Outside, London is roaring. Street hawkers crying their wares, horses clattering, factories belching smoke. But in here, you're expected to glide like a ghost, speaking softly, moving with choreographed precision. It's like slipping into a parallel universe where coal dust doesn't exist and everyone pretends to be statues animated by politeness. You feel your shoulders tightening, your breath shortening. The temptation is to crack a joke, to loosen the mood, but careful. Humor in the Victorian drawing room is a minefield. A witty remark may elevate you, the wrong pun may sink you. Better to hold your tongue, at least until you've gauged the room's temperature. Still, you survive. You've crossed the room, bowed or curtsied without fainting, and even managed to accept a cup of tea without spilling it down your front. For now, your reputation remains intact. You're still in the game, but don't relax yet. The real test is coming. 'Cause next, they're gonna sit you down for dinner. And let me tell you, dinner is where the etiquette rules multiply like rabbits. You've crossed the room, survived the polite stares, and even managed a bow that didn't look like you were falling asleep mid-bend. But now comes the battlefield where reputations are truly won or lost. The dinner table. You think eating is simple. Lift fork, insert food, chew, repeat. Not here. In Victorian society, a dining room is less about nourishment and more about navigating a minefield of cutlery, courses, and silent judgments that can stick to you for years. The footman draws out your chair. You hesitate. Do you sit immediately? Wrong. You wait until the hostess takes her seat first. Only then do you lower yourself gracefully, as though gravity has been instructed to treat you gently. You unfold your napkin, but not all the way. Fold it in half, draped neatly across your lap. Wipe your mouth discreetly, never your forehead. And whatever you do, don't tuck it into your collar like a bib. That's the fastest way to earn a lifetime nickname like the baby at banquet. Mainstream fact: Victorian dinners often stretched across multiple courses, sometimes as many as 12 or 14. Each course had its own cutlery, and each piece of cutlery had a strict order of use. Start from the outside and work inward. You may glance down and see a semicircle of forks, knives, and spoons that looks like the tool chest of a very polite blacksmith. Use the wrong fork, and you've marked yourself forever as someone raised in the wilderness. The first course arrives. Soup. Here's your test. You dip your spoon away from you, never toward. You sip silently from the side, not the tip. And you must angle the spoon so gracefully that not a single drop drips back into the bowl. Quirky tidbit: some etiquette guides insisted that slurping wasn't just rude, it was an insult to the cook's dignity. Imagine a chef hiding in the kitchen, clutching their ladle, ears straining for the faintest offensive slurp. You glance at the bread roll beside your plate. Easy snack, right? Careful. You must not bite into it whole. Instead, break off a small piece. Butter that piece only, then eat it. Repeat. One Victorian observer claimed that anyone who buttered the entire roll at once might as well stand up and declare, "I was raised in a barn." Historians still argue whether these rigid bread rules were truly widespread or simply exaggerated by etiquette writers trying to sell more manuals. The wine arrives next, poured by an attentive servant. You mustn't gulp, nor may you refuse entirely, unless you have a polite excuse. Temperance movements were rising in the period, so claiming you abstain for moral reasons might actually boost your respectability. On the other hand, refusing could insult the host. Best to raise the glass, sip gently, and look as though you've been communing with vineyards since infancy. Then comes fish, served with its own special knife. You wonder why you can't just use the regular one. But no, there's a separate implement designed solely for sliding under delicate fillets. Heaven forbid you're caught sawing at salmon with the wrong blade. One guest in 1880 recounted that a gentleman once stabbed at his soul with a standard fork, and the room went so quiet you could hear the gas lamps hiss. The conversation swirls around you, low, polite, filled with careful comments about travel, books, or the weather, politics, dangerous, religion, risky, jokes, best left to professionals. A safe remark about the quality of the soup is the gold standard. After all, you're here to chew, not to challenge. And when the main course arrives, roast beef perhaps, with potatoes, you must carve neatly, chew quietly, and never, ever lick your knife. That rule was hammered into middle-class households with the ferocity of a commandment. To lick the knife was to reveal your true savage self. By the time dessert rolls around, tiny cakes, sugared fruit, you're exhausted. The battle with spoons, forks, and conversation has drained you. You dab your lips with a napkin one last time, fold it gently, and place it to the left of your plate. Not on the chair, not crumpled in the middle. Left side folded, like a well-behaved goodbye. And as you push back from the table, heart pounding with relief, you realize you didn't spill, you didn't slurp, and you didn't stab the fish with the wrong fork. For one glorious evening, you have survived the Victorian dinner table. Dinner is over, and somehow you've survived the cutlery gauntlet without committing social suicide. But don't exhale too loudly, because the battlefield has only shifted. Now comes the art of conversation, and in Victorian society, conversation isn't a free exchange of ideas. It's a careful dance, a polite duel where words matter less than tone, timing, and the ability to sound interesting without ever being controversial. You settle into a drawing room chair, the upholstery stiff enough to remind you that lounging is forbidden. Around you, clusters of guests form small conversational circles, voices lowered to that particular volume Victorians mastered, loud enough to be heard, quiet enough to avoid sounding common. A hostess hovers nearby, steering talk like a conductor with an invisible baton. And you must open your mouth and contribute without bringing ruin upon yourself. Mainstream fact: etiquette manuals drilled people relentlessly on proper topics. Suitable subjects included the weather, yes even then, travel experiences, books, theater performances, and mild compliments about the host's home. Dangerous terrain included politics, religion, finances, or, God forbid, bodily functions. The goal was not debate but pleasant noise, a soundtrack of civility. You turn to your neighbor. Perhaps you're tempted to launch into a spirited monologue about the ongoing debates over Darwin's origin of species. But careful, not everyone finds monkeys as ancestors an appropriate dessert topic. Historians still argue whether Darwin's theories were more controversial among the clergy or among society hostesses who didn't want apes discussed over sponge cake. Instead, you might murmur, "The weather has been unpredictable this season, don't you think?" Congratulations. You've chosen the safest conversational starter in history. The person nods, responds with equal vagueness, and for a moment, you both bask in the dull glow of mutual respectability. Quirky tidbit: Fans weren't just accessories for women, they were communication tools. A lady could signal entire sentences with a flick, flutter, or snap of her fan. Open slowly? I wish to know you better. Close quickly? Leave me be. The drawing room was less like a social gathering and more like a silent Morse code convention, fluttering all around you while you pretended not to notice. Humor, of course, was permitted, but only in small, genteel doses. A witty remark about someone's absent-mindedness might draw chuckles. A bawdy joke would slam the conversation shut like a door in your face. One diarist recalled a gentleman who made a pun about sausages at a dinner party only to find his invitations dwindled thereafter. Apparently, sausage humor was a social death sentence. And then there's the art of listening. You nod thoughtfully, smile at the right moments, and issue the occasional, "How fascinating," even when the subject is less fascinating than watching paint dry. Remember, your goal isn't to shine too brightly, that risks overshadowing the host, but to appear attentive, agreeable, and just clever enough to avoid being dismissed. All the while, you must modulate your voice. Too loud, and you seem vulgar. Too quiet, and you force people to lean in, which risks accusations of impropriety. You aim for the middle, a soothing murmur, as though you're narrating a bedtime story. Ironically, that's exactly what you're listening to right now. As the evening drifts on, you begin to feel the subtle exhaustion of Victorian conversation. Every word is filtered, every smile rehearsed, every pause filled with careful calculation. Outside, the city clatters with life, costermongers shouting, cab wheels rattling, but in here, conversation is a symphony of controlled boredom. Yet somehow, you manage. You discuss the weather without sounding like a broken barometer. You avoid scandalous topics, and you even laugh politely at someone's joke about umbrellas. When the hostess rises and signals the shift to another room, you know you've passed the test. Still, the thought lingers. You haven't said anything real. You've been an actor, your words stitched together like embroidery. And that's the secret of Victorian conversation. It isn't about truth. It's about keeping the room pleasantly buzzing, like a hive of bees that never sting. The drawing room chatter winds down, cups of tea clink softly onto saucers, and now your eyes wander toward the real mystery of Victorian society, courtship. If dinner was a minefield, romance is a labyrinth, and every twist and turn is lined with rules so strict they make your fork and knife drills look like child's play. You thought falling in love was about feelings? No. Here it's about fans, gloves, chaperones, and endless silent messages that could make or break reputations. You spot a young lady across the room, lace at her collar, a small fan fluttering in her hand. Do you walk over? Not without permission. Every step toward courtship is governed by rituals that feel more like a chess game than a romance. A misplaced move could label you reckless. A too bold glance could invite gossip before you've said a single word. Mainstream fact, courtship in Victorian England was almost never private. Young women of respectable families were always chaperoned, often by mothers or older relatives whose job was to watch like hawks and prevent scandal. Even in public spaces like parks or theaters, any extended conversation between unmarried men and women required oversight. Romance was a performance conducted under constant surveillance. You adjust your stance, remembering that posture itself is a language. Hands behind your back, acceptable. Hands stuffed in your pockets, vulgar. Hands gesturing wildly, too continental and therefore suspicious. You settle for holding your gloves politely, hoping you look thoughtful rather than awkward. Now, here's the quirky tidbit, the fan language. Yes, that fluttering accessory wasn't just for cooling oneself, it was a communication system. Resting the fan on her cheek might mean yes. Snapping it shut could signal we're being watched. A dropped fan? Let's talk later. Of course, some historians still argue whether this so-called language of the fan was truly widespread or just a romantic exaggeration repeated in etiquette books. Either way, the possibility leaves you paranoid. Did she just fan herself because she's warm or because she secretly wants you to fetch lemonade? Conversation is equally tricky. You might exchange pleasantries about the weather, or perhaps inquire about her enjoyment of the evening. Anything more personal is off limits at first. Compliment her intelligence too soon, and you risk impropriety. Compliment her appearance too boldly, and you'll be branded a cad. Compliment her dog? Safe. Everyone loves a well-behaved Victorian dog. Courtship often unfolded slowly, through shared outings, carefully orchestrated dances, and endless written correspondence. Letters were lifelines, but even those had to pass through family scrutiny. Imagine pouring out your heart on paper, only for her father to read it before she does. Talk about romance with training wheels. And the rules don't just guard women, they trap men too. A gentleman who paid attention to one lady too often risked being accused of serious intentions. Pull back, and he looked fickle. Step forward too eagerly, and he looked desperate. You stand there, wondering if love is possible at all when every smile is measured like medicine on a spoon. Still, sparks did fly. Beneath the corsets, gloves, and watchful eyes, young Victorians found ways to flirt. A glance held 1 second too long. A fan flicked with suspicious intent. A shared laugh at something truly dull. These were the tiny rebellions that made hearts race. And yet, even here, failure lurks. Imagine fumbling your bow at the dance, stepping on her skirt, or misreading a fan flutter. One mistake could be retold for weeks, your name paired forever with humiliation. A man once tripped while approaching a lady in Hyde Park, and for years afterward, acquaintances greeted him with a subtle stumble in mockery. You leave the gathering that night knowing you've barely scratched the surface. Courtship here isn't passion, it's patience wrapped in lace. You walk home under the gaslight, replaying her fan's every flutter in your mind, wondering if it meant something or nothing at all. You've tiptoed through the world of fans and glances, but if Victorian courtship felt like a game of chess, marriage is the tournament finale, long, formal, and dictated by rules you can't escape. The idea of marrying for love is whispered in novels, but in real life, it's more about contracts, property, and carefully balanced reputations. You wake up one morning after another stiff drawing room evening, and the weight of expectation presses down on you like the corset stays your future spouse will be laced into. Marriage begins not with passion, but with paperwork. Families scrutinize finances with the diligence of auditors. A union without a proper dowry or inheritance is treated like gambling with your children's future. Respectable middle-class fathers would rather their daughters marry a dull banker with solid credit than a dashing poet with debts as long as his mustache. Historians still argue whether Victorian parents were more interested in love matches as the century wore on, or whether most unions were still firmly nailed together by property and social advancement. Mainstream fact: legally once married, a woman's property was absorbed into her husband's until reforms in the late 19th century. Her wages, if she had them. Her inheritance, even the furniture she brought into the house, legally his. The doctrine of coverture meant she didn't exist separately under the law. Imagine saying "I do," and instantly becoming, in the eyes of the courts, a decorative extension of your husband's waistcoat. Quirky tidbit: some etiquette guides even gave married couples strict rules for showing affection in public. A kiss outside the privacy of the home was considered scandalous, even between husband and wife. One observer joked that married couples could always be identified at parties because they were the least likely to stand near each other. Apparently, passion was something to be filed away like tax receipts. As you navigate this world, you realize marriage wasn't just about two individuals. It was a public performance of respectability. Neighbors peered at your curtains, noting whether they were clean, whether your children were neatly dressed, whether your household staff behaved properly. Your private life was everyone's business, parceled out in whispers and glances. And of course, the roles were rigid. Husbands were expected to provide, to be firm but benevolent rulers of the household. Wives were expected to manage the domestic sphere, maintain appearances, and serve as moral anchors for the family. deviate from this script and gossip would spread faster than steam down a railway line. The irony? While you're bound in these polite shackles, literature of the era is teeming with rebellion. Novels like Jane Eyre or Middlemarch toy with ideas of independent women and love beyond social contracts, even as most real marriages remain tightly bound by duty. It's as though Victorian fiction dreamed what Victorian reality denied. You picture your future, standing stiffly at the altar, vowing fidelity while half the congregation whispers about the size of the dowry. Afterward, the wedding breakfast stretches on, filled with clinking glasses and cautious laughter, while you sneak glances at your new spouse, both of you silently calculating what life in this joint performance will look like. And yet, despite the rules, people carved out affection. Behind closed doors, some couples laughed, loved, and even thrived. Others lived like polite strangers under the same roof. As you step into this married world, gloves still immaculate, you can't help but wonder, is this a union of hearts, or simply a contract written in silk and ink? Either way, you're in it now. Welcome to Victorian marriage, part love story, part business deal, and entirely smothered in lace. You've survived the altar, endured the polite applause, and settled into married life. But don't think for a second that the performance is over. The stage simply shifts to a different set, the tea table. In Victorian society, tea isn't just a drink, it's a ritual, a ceremony, and in many ways, a battlefield where reputations can be cemented or ruined with a single misplaced spoon. The kettle whistles in the background, the scent of strong black tea curls into the air, and the porcelain cups gleam under the gaslight. Guests are gathering, their expectations balanced precariously on saucers. The clink of teaspoons is practically the soundtrack of the 19th century. You, of course, must not treat this like a casual coffee break. Every gesture, how you pour, stir, and sip, has an unwritten rule. Mainstream fact: afternoon tea, popularized by Anna, Duchess of Bedford in the 1840s, quickly spread across society as a daily social anchor. It was the perfect chance for gossip, matchmaking, and subtle competition. A proper tea table showed off wealth and refinement. Crisp linens, tiered trays of sandwiches, scones, and cakes, and porcelain so delicate it seemed it might shatter if you breathed on it wrong. You pick up the teapot. Do you pour milk first or tea first? Ah, here comes the eternal question. Some insisted milk first protected fragile porcelain from cracking. Others argued tea first allowed you to judge the strength of the brew. Historians still argue whether this divide was truly a class marker or simply a long-running domestic squabble elevated to myth. Either way, if you choose incorrectly in the wrong company, you might as well spill the pot in someone's lap. Quirky tidbit: spoons were not meant to clink. Stirring tea required a delicate, almost invisible motion, back and forth, never in circles, and certainly never rattling against the sides. Etiquette manuals warned that noisy stirring revealed a lack of breeding. Imagine the pressure. You're trying to dissolve a sugar cube without producing the tiniest sound, like some kind of stealth mission for dessert lovers. Then there's the matter of how you hold the cup. Fingers through the handle, not around it. Cup lifted with a steady hand, saucer remaining behind unless you're standing. And for heaven's sake, don't stick your pinky in the air. That's a modern cliche, not a Victorian practice. Doing so would have earned you ridicule, not admiration. The conversation over tea is just as fraught. Gossip flows as freely as the Darjeeling. A well-timed remark about the quality of the cakes can elevate your standing. A too bold observation about someone's marriage might doom you. Even laughter has to be controlled. Amused chuckles rather than loud guffaws. Too much mirth and you're vulgar. Too little and you're cold. And then there's the performance of the hostess. She glides from guest to guest, replenishing cups, ensuring the cakes are passed, offering just enough hospitality to seem generous without appearing desperate. The perfect hostess walks a tightrope between abundance and restraint. One diarist noted with admiration that Lady X never ran out of tea nor patience, and once suspected the two were linked. Outside, carriages rattle past, the world roaring with soot and commerce. But here, Inside, it's as though time has slowed. The delicate clink of cup against saucer, the murmur of voices, the faint aroma of lemon slices. It's a bubble of refinement in a city otherwise drowning in grime. You lift your cup, careful not to slurp, careful not to burn your tongue, careful not to let your hand tremble, and for a brief moment you almost feel like you belong. You've mastered the pour, survived the milk debate, and avoided the fatal spoon clink. Then you realize this isn't about tea at all. It's about proving you can survive in a world where even the smallest actions are magnified into signs of character. You set your cup down gently, smile at your neighbor, and take a bite of a dainty sandwich you can barely taste. Congratulations, you've passed the tea test. The tea things are cleared away, the last crumbs of sponge cake vanish, and now you must brave the next frontier of Victorian life. Public transport. Forget your modern bus pass or the quiet anonymity of a subway ride with headphones. In 19th century London, stepping into a railway carriage or climbing aboard an omnibus is just another stage where etiquette rules apply and your every movement can betray your breeding or lack of it. You stand at the curb as an omnibus rattles toward you, horses snorting, wheels splattering mud. Do you scramble up first? Absolutely not. Ladies enter before gentlemen, and gentlemen must assist them without appearing too familiar. A gloved hand offered lightly is polite. A firm tug might be mistaken for eagerness, and eagerness looks suspiciously like impropriety. Mainstream fact: the omnibus, a horse-drawn bus, became a fixture of London transport by the 1820s and 30s, with railway travel expanding rapidly by mid-century. These were revolutionary, shrinking the city and making crosstown travel possible in under an hour. But they also mixed people of different classes in a way society found uncomfortable. Manuals cropped up with stern reminders on how to behave in these cramped spaces. You climb aboard and glance around. Men must remove their hats inside, but not toss them onto their laps as though they were cushions. Women are expected to arrange skirts discreetly so as not to sweep against neighbors. Heaven forbid your bustle jab someone in the ribs. Though honestly, with the size of some of these contraptions, it's a miracle anyone fit inside at all. Quirky tidbit: some railway companies even printed etiquette guides reminding passengers not to spit out the window. Yes, apparently that had to be said. Others begged gentlemen not to smoke cigars in closed compartments, though many ignored the pleas, leaving fellow travelers choking politely for hours. Historians still argue whether these early rules of travel were widely obeyed or more often ignored in the smoky chaos of Victorian commutes. End conversation. Keep it short and respectable. Discussing politics loudly on the train is as frowned upon as singing bawdy songs. Silence, accompanied by polite nods, is safest. One observer wrote that a true gentleman could ride an entire hour in company without once betraying the least annoyance at his neighbor's elbows. You try, but when someone's umbrella jabs your knee, you're tempted to mutter something less than polite. There's also the matter of luggage. Trunks and hat boxes should be stowed neatly, not sprawled in the aisle. Nothing signals vulgarity faster than sprawling your belongings across 3 seats while fellow passengers stand. At least today, you don't have to juggle a live chicken, though in rural lines, that happened too. Imagine balancing etiquette with feathers flying in your face. Then there's the delicate issue of staring. Victorians were acutely sensitive to being observed. A gentleman must not gaze too long at a lady across the carriage. It suggests impertinence. A lady, in turn, must pretend she hasn't noticed anything, all while adjusting her gloves with serene composure. It's the quietest battle of wills you'll ever sit through. Outside the window, London unspools in a blur of brick and soot. Inside, the carriage rocks, the lamps flicker, and you sit bolt upright, clutching your gloves, trying desperately to look like you belong in this cramped, smoky microcosm of society. You feel sweat beating under your collar but dare not loosen it. That would be far too casual. The journey ends. You stand, offer a polite hand to your fellow passenger, and step off the omnibus with as much dignity as possible. hoping the mud splashed on your trousers doesn't undo all your careful restraint. Congratulations, you've survived Victorian public transport without being labeled a ruffian. That's no small achievement, considering the horses smelled, the smoke stung your eyes, and the rules weighed heavier than the luggage. The omnibus rattles away behind you, leaving your boots damp with London mud. You tug at your gloves and begin walking, only to realize that in Victorian society, even this, just walking down the street, is ruled by etiquette. Step in the wrong place, stroll at the wrong pace, or stand on the wrong side, and you may as well announce yourself as a barbarian straight from the coal pits. You place one foot forward, then another, and already you're being judged. Which side of the pavement are you on? That matters. Gentlemen are expected to walk on the outside, nearer the street, shielding their companions from splashes of mud flung by passing carriages. Ladies take the inside, closer to the shop windows. Fail at this, and not only do you risk ruining someone's hemline, but you also risk whispers of uncouth trailing behind you like smoke. Mainstream fact: promenading was a recognized social ritual. Hyde Park's Rotten Row, Regent Street, seaside esplanades, these weren't just places to stretch your legs. They were stages where the well-to-do displayed themselves in carefully curated outfits. Walking was theater, and every glance, every nod, every measured pace was part of the show. Quirky tidbit: some etiquette writers warned against walking too quickly, lest you appear anxious, or worse, trade-minded. A slow, steady pace suggested leisure and refinement. Imagine being scolded for walking with purpose, as though punctuality were vulgar. Historians still argue whether these prescriptions were actually observed by most Victorians, or merely aspirations penned by anxious middle-class writers hoping to imitate aristocrats. Your companion adjusts her parasol. Do you offer your arm? Yes, but only in certain circumstances: crowded streets, muddy paths, or evening strolls. Offering too readily suggests presumption. Failing to offer when needed suggests indifference. You extend your elbow cautiously, the way one might offer a fragile shelf for display china. She accepts, and together you step into the slow parade of society. Of course, danger lurks everywhere. A careless glance into a shop window might be interpreted as vulgar consumerism. Too much eye contact with strangers, impertinent. No eye contact at all, cold. You are expected to perform the perfect balance. Acknowledge acquaintances with a subtle nod. Ignore strangers politely, and never gawk at curiosities like a tourist. The irony is thick. While you're fussing about which cobblestone to step on, London itself is chaos. Costermongers bawl their wares, children dart between horses, mud splashes in arcs, and the smell of dung competes with roasting chestnuts from a street vendor. Yet within this bedlam you must glide like a swan, serene and spotless, as if the world itself exists solely to frame your promenade. At one point, a carriage wheel sends a spray of muck across your trousers. You freeze. Do you curse? Absolutely not. You pretend it hasn't happened, even as cold slime trickles toward your boots. To acknowledge it would be to invite laughter, and the golden rule of Victorian walking is this: maintain composure at all costs. The walk continues. Your feet ache, your collar chafes, but you maintain the pace of leisure. The lamplight flickers, the air tastes of coal, and you practice the most unnatural thing of all, looking utterly natural. By the time you return home, you're exhausted. You didn't trip, you didn't splash anyone, and you didn't commit the sin of hurrying. That, in this strange era, counts as triumph. You've walked the muddy pavements without scandal, but the real choreography of Victorian life often unfolds indoors, not outside. The moment you cross your own threshold, another set of rules takes command, the delicate dance between masters and servants. This isn't simply about paying wages, it's about preserving a hierarchy so rigid that even the way you hand over a teacup can become a silent drama. The door closes behind you, and instantly the atmosphere changes. A servant appears, perhaps a butler or maid, head bowed slightly, hands folded with perfect composure. You nod in return, brief, polite, but never effusive. Gratitude must be measured. Too warm, and you blur the lines of hierarchy. too cold, and you're branded tyrannical. The perfect master strikes an impossible balance, firm authority wrapped in velvet restraint. Mainstream fact: Victorian households, even middle-class ones, relied heavily on servants. Cooks, housemaids, butlers, governesses, and coachmen formed the backbone of daily life. The census of 1851 showed that 1 in 3 women in Britain worked as domestic servants, making service the largest single occupation of the period. The etiquette wasn't just about efficiency, it was a public performance of order and respectability. You glance into the dining room, where the table is set to exacting standards, forks lined like soldiers, glasses gleaming like crystal lanterns. Servants orchestrate this perfection, yet they must do it silently, almost invisibly. Their competence reflects not only on themselves, but on you. A careless servant suggests a careless household, and by extension, a careless master. Reputation trickles down the hierarchy like candle wax. Quirky tidbit: some etiquette books even instructed servants on how loudly they could knock when entering a room. 3 gentle taps meant respect. Too loud was considered intrusive. Too soft was suspiciously sneaky. Imagine living in a world where even the volume of your knuckles on wood carried moral weight. Of course, the rules weren't just for servants. Masters and mistresses had strict boundaries too. You must never overstep by confiding too much, lest you dissolve the line that separates you. Yet you also mustn't humiliate or physically punish staff. That marked you as brutish. Instead, discipline was administered through subtler weapons: dismissal, references, or the slow starvation of icy disapproval. Historians still argue whether these relationships were as strictly formal in practice as etiquette books claimed. Diaries sometimes reveal deep bonds of trust and affection. Nannies, beloved as second mothers, butlers who served faithfully for decades. Others reveal households full of resentment, with servants mocking their employers behind closed doors. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the fog between appearances and reality. You remove your gloves, hand them to the waiting maid, and notice she curtsies just enough to signal respect without groveling. The choreography is flawless. In another room, the cook stirs a pot, her labor invisible to your guests, but vital to your social survival. Every gesture they make, every silent step across the carpet keeps the performance intact. And yet, despite the careful order, tension simmers beneath the surface. Gossip flows upward as easily as downward. Servants overhear everything: arguments, secrets, flirtations, and sometimes share them beyond the household. A careless word spoken at home might reappear as scandal in a drawing room across town. You sigh, sinking into a chair, realizing that even here, within the supposed privacy of your home, you are never truly off stage. The rules follow you inside, enforced not only by your peers, but by the very people who sweep your floors. So you straighten your posture, thank your butler with measured warmth, and accept the cup of tea he offers. You drink carefully, aware that even the tilt of your wrist is part of the unspoken contract of class. Welcome home. In Victorian England, your own house is both sanctuary and theater, and the servants are not just the backstage crew, they're part of the audience too. Your house hums with quiet order, the servants moving like shadows, and now it's your turn to step into the role of host. In Victorian society, hosting guests is not just about offering food and drink, it's about staging a performance where the furniture, the lighting, the timing of visits, and even the way you usher people to the door all carry layers of meaning. Forget to master this ritual, and you'll quickly earn a reputation for being ill-bred, which, in this world, is about as damning as being accused of treason. The bell rings. A guest has arrived. You glance quickly around the drawing room. Are the chairs arranged properly? They must be set in conversational groupings, never lined up against the wall like a doctor's waiting room. A semicircle around the fireplace shows warmth and sociability. An awkward sprawl of chairs screams chaos. Even the distance between them matters. Too close is impertinent. Too far suggests coldness. Mainstream fact: visits were a cornerstone of Victorian social life. Families often spend entire afternoons paying calls, a circuit of dropping in on acquaintances for precisely the right length of time. Too brief and it looked dismissive. Too long and you risked imposing. The golden rule: 15 minutes for a casual acquaintance, up to an hour for close friends. And yes, people actually watch the clock. Your guest enters and immediately the dance begins. Do you offer tea? Of course, but not instantly. You must first allow a few minutes of pleasantries before ringing for the tray. The ritual is predictable, but it reassures everyone that life here is orderly and polite. Quirky tidbit: some etiquette guides went so far as to specify which chairs guests should or should not take. Sitting in the host's favorite armchair? Disaster. Choosing a seat too near the fire? Selfish. The safest option was always the visitor's chair. Slightly less comfortable, subtly placed, and universally understood as the correct perch for the socially cautious. You watch the clock discreetly. It's been 20 minutes. Is your guest overstaying? You mustn't glance too obviously, but you may drop hints. A slight rise from your chair, a casual remark about the lateness of the hour. The guest, if well trained, will take the cue, rise gracefully, and thank you for your hospitality before departing. Historians still argue whether most Victorians actually adhered so rigidly to these time limits, or whether they were more flexible behind closed doors. Diaries suggest both extremes. Some families rigidly cut off visits at 30 minutes sharp, while others lingered for hours, gossiping until the candles guttered out. The truth likely depended on status, personality, and how good the cake was. Hosting wasn't limited to tea and parlors. Evening events, soirees, musicales, dinner parties raised the stakes even higher. Invitations had to be written in proper phrasing, addressed with titles intact, delivered at the right hour of the day. A poorly worded invitation was social quicksand, pulling your reputation down with it. And once your guest departed, the final act awaited, seeing them to the door. Accompany them too far and you appear overeager, too little and you appear dismissive. The precise number of steps you take with them is almost as important as the conversation you shared inside. You close the door at last, exhaling with relief. Hosting in Victorian England is less about warmth than about precision. Your guests may have left with polite smiles, but you know the truth. They're already judging the arrangement of your chairs, the firmness of your handshakes, and the temperature of your tea. Congratulations, you've hosted without catastrophe. Whether you've impressed them enough to earn another visit, only time and their calling cards will tell. The guests have gone, the chairs are back in their polite semicircle, and you imagine you can finally breathe. But in Victorian society, even silence speaks. Tomorrow, someone may send you flowers, not merely as decoration, but as coded messages more intricate than half the conversations you just endured. Welcome to the peculiar poetry of the Victorian language of flowers, where a bouquet is never just a bouquet. You wake to find a servant carrying in a vase of fresh blooms, roses, violets, lilies, each petal loaded with meanings you're expected to decode like a scholar of botany and gossip combined. A red rose, for instance, boldly announces love. A yellow rose? That signals jealousy. A violet whispers of modesty, while an orchid brags of rare and exotic beauty. Your drawing room suddenly looks less like a garden and more like a cryptogram. Mainstream fact: this floral code, known as floriography, surged in popularity during the Victorian era. Entire books and pocket dictionaries were published, listing hundreds of flowers and their symbolic meanings. Couples too restrained to speak openly might conduct entire flirtations through carefully chosen blossoms. A sprig of rosemary tucked into a bouquet signaled remembrance. Ivy conveyed fidelity. The right bloom could open doors, the wrong one could slam them. You study your bouquet nervously. Is that a marigold? Oh dear. That suggests grief or cruelty, depending on the source, and that's the problem. Different dictionaries didn't always agree. Historians still argue whether Victorians actually took these codes seriously, or whether most people simply enjoyed the novelty while occasionally misinterpreting themselves into embarrassment. Quirky tidbit: one gentleman supposedly caused a scandal by sending a lady a bouquet of basil. he thought it meant good wishes. Unfortunately, in some dictionaries, basil symbolized hatred. The poor woman fainted, convinced she'd been cursed by a bunch of herbs. Even arranging flowers in your own home is risky. Too many lilies, and people whisper you're obsessed with funerals. Too many roses, and they accuse you of vanity. Even the placement matters. Flowers in the drawing room show hospitality, while flowers in the bedroom risk impropriety. You arrange the vase, hands trembling, wondering whether your choice of daffodils will be read as cheerful hope or subtle mockery. The irony, of course, is that London itself reeks of less poetic smells: coal smoke, sewage, horse dung, yet here in your parlor, you're expected to decode a daisy as though your life depends on it. Outside, soot blackens the walls. Inside, a pansy silently accuses you of thinking of another. And it doesn't stop at romance. Friends, rivals, and even business acquaintances send floral messages, declining an invitation, send a sprig of rue, congratulating someone on an engagement. A bouquet heavy with orange blossoms will do the trick. Need to apologize without saying the words? Try violets, though make sure they're blue, not white, or you may accidentally insult them further. You sit back and stare at your bouquet, exhausted. In this society, even flowers gossip. You can't sip tea, attend a dinner, or arrange a vase without becoming part of some elaborate code. You sigh, lift one bloom to your nose, and inhale its perfume, knowing full well that somewhere, someone is already speculating about what message you sent by doing just that. Congratulations, you've survived the first bouquet, but rest assured, the floral battles have only just begun. The flowers are still perfuming your parlor, whispering coded secrets, when another layer of Victorian life pulls you out the door, the gentleman's club. If your drawing room is the stage for polite performance, the club is the smoky backstage where reputations are built, gossip is traded, and the future of politics, or at least the menu for next week's dinner, is quietly decided. You stride down Pall Mall, boots echoing on the pavement, and pause before a grand facade marked by tall columns and polished brass. Inside, the air is thick with cigar smoke, leather chairs, and the low murmur of men who believe the world revolves around them. The truth? In Victorian Britain, it often did. Mainstream fact: gentlemen's clubs flourished during the 19th century, each catering to a particular circle. The Athenaeum for intellectuals, White's for the aristocracy, the Reform Club for liberals, the Carlton for conservatives. Your choice of club announced your loyalties as loudly as any speech. Membership wasn't just social, it was political currency, opening doors to influence, careers, and carefully arranged marriages. You remove your hat, hand it to the porter, and glance around. Every rule here is silent but strict. Don't slouch in the armchairs, don't speak too loudly, and above all, don't draw attention to yourself by breaking protocol. A misplaced remark in this room could trail you for years, whispered from cigar to cigar. Quirky tidbit: White's, one of the most famous clubs, kept a betting book in which members wagered on everything from elections to the weather to the survival of acquaintances. One member famously bet on which raindrop would reach the bottom of a window first. Imagine the self-importance of men in starched collars solemnly gambling on condensation. Historians still argue whether such wagers were harmless fun or signs of decadent boredom among the elite. You're ushered toward the smoking room, where the fire glows and the conversation flows in measured tones. Politics is discussed, but cautiously. Finance is whispered about, but never flaunted. Literature and travel are safe, so long as you don't sound too enthusiastic. The correct tone is mild interest, never passion. Passion, after all, belongs to poets and revolutionaries, neither of whom are particularly welcome here. The staff move quietly, replenishing brandy glasses, delivering newspapers, and clearing ashtrays with the precision of a military drill. You glance at the Times, pretending to be absorbed, though you're more interested in the snippets of gossip drifting from the next chair. A duke's nephew in debt, a cabinet minister rumored to be wavering, a scandal involving a misplaced horse at Ascot, all shared with the same gravity one might reserve for a declaration of war. What about women? That's simple, they aren't here. Gentlemen's clubs are sanctuaries of male exclusivity where even the mention of wives or daughters feels faintly improper. Ironically, decisions made in these smoky rooms will often shape those women's lives, yet they themselves will never set foot across the threshold. You shift in your chair, the leather creaking faintly, and realize that clubs are less about relaxation than about belonging. Every puff of smoke, every clipped remark, every nod from a fellow member is a reminder. You're inside. You're part of the circle. But inclusion is fragile. Step wrong, say too much, gamble too foolishly, drink too freely, and you'll find yourself outside the doors, peering back at the smoke and leather you once took for granted. The night drifts on, the fire burns low, and you rise to leave. Your coat is returned to you, brushed of lint. You step back into the London fog, ears ringing with laughter and whispers. The world beyond is loud, chaotic, and filthy. But in the club, everything seemed orderly, important, and steeped in rules that ensured everyone knew their place. Congratulations. You've survived your first evening in a Victorian gentleman's club. Whether you'll be invited back depends less on your charm than on whether you stirred your brandy with sufficient restraint. The smoke of the gentleman's club still clings faintly to your coat as Sunday morning dawns, and now you're drawn into yet another arena where etiquette rules supreme, the church. Attendance isn't optional, it's a visible declaration of respectability. Even if your faith is lukewarm, skipping Sunday service is as socially risky as forgetting your calling cards. If you want to survive in Victorian society, you must sit, stand, kneel, and bow at precisely the right moments, all while looking pious enough to be above suspicion. The bells toll across the city, echoing through foggy streets. Families pour out of townhouses in their finest attire, gloves buttoned, hats brushed, boots freshly polished. Even children are scrubbed within an inch of their lives, collars starched so stiffly they can barely nod. You join the slow procession, knowing full well that half the congregation is watching who arrives late, who looks tired, and who dares to appear underdressed. Mainstream fact: in Victorian England, church attendance was both a spiritual practice and a social performance. Pew rents meant that wealthy families literally bought the best seats, near the pulpit, and in full view. Poorer folks sat at the back or in galleries, invisible but present. The act of being seen in church, dressed respectably, was itself an advertisement of moral standing. You slip into a pew and sit upright. Do not sprawl, do not fidget. Children must remain silent, an impossible feat that often resulted in discreet pinches from mothers when little bodies squirmed. You open your prayer book, but don't read too quickly. You must appear reverent, not rushed. The hymns begin, and you're expected to sing, but not with too much gusto. A strong voice might be read as showing off, a weak voice as laziness. Aim for steady mediocrity, the safest note in the book. Quirky tidbit: some parishes even published etiquette reminders about how to behave during services. Rules included not coughing too loudly, not dozing off, and never, under any circumstances, nodding to acquaintances across the aisle. Imagine suppressing a sneeze while your neighbor pretends not to notice your face turning red as a beet. And then comes the sermon. The minister speaks of morality, duty, empire, and family, his words weaving through the candlelit air. Some listeners are devout, hanging on every phrase. Others are discreetly calculating what time luncheon will be served. Either way, your posture must never betray boredom. A drooping head could suggest sleep, and sleep in church is a scandal almost as bad as blasphemy. Historians still argue whether sermons truly shaped daily Victorian morality, or whether church was simply one more theater of appearances. The collection plate comes around. Coins clink softly, and here too, performance reigns. Too much generosity looks like flaunting, too little hints at stinginess. The middle path is safest, enough to be respectable, not enough to make you memorable. Service ends at last. You file out with the crowd, nodding politely, murmuring pleasantries, and knowing that this procession is as much a parade as any walk through Hyde Park. Attendance has been noted. Your presence, your clothes, your posture, all logged silently in the communal ledger of respectability. Outside, the air is crisp, the bells still echoing. You sigh in relief, tug at your gloves, and remind yourself that in Victorian society, even piety is a performance. Congratulations, you've survived Sunday service without scandal. Whether you found spiritual nourishment or merely another set of rules, well, that's between you and the fog. The church bells fade, and as you make your way home, you pass families shepherding small, stiffly dressed children down the street. Their collars are starched, their boots pinching, and their little hands tucked obediently into gloves. You quickly realize that in Victorian society, manners aren't just expected of adults. They're drilled into children from the moment they can walk. Childhood isn't a carefree romp through fields, it's an apprenticeship in etiquette, and every nod, curtsy, and yes ma'am is a lesson rehearsed for the stage of life. You sit in a parlor later that afternoon, observing a family at work. A young boy is balancing precariously on the edge of his chair, back ramrod straight, resisting the urge to swing his legs. His sister, no older than 7, lifts her teacup with studied care, pinkies firmly tucked in place. They're not playing at being adults, they are miniature adults in training. Mainstream fact: Victorian children, especially in middle and upper class households, were raised under strict codes of behavior. Obedience, modesty, and self-control were prized above all. The notion of seen but not heard dominated, meaning children were expected to be quiet, polite presences in adult spaces, not rambunctious whirlwinds. Manuals on child rearing stressed moral character and correct manners as inseparable. Quirky tidbit: some etiquette books even gave children instructions on how to bow to dolls, toys, or pets as practice for greeting real people. One guide suggested boys should rehearse hat tipping in the mirror until their motions became graceful without affectation. You can almost picture a solemn 9-year-old bowing gravely to a stuffed rabbit before bedtime. Discipline, of course, was constant. A child who spoke out of turn in company might be marched out of the room, scolded, and returned with the air of a criminal pardoned at the gallows. Historians still argue whether such severity produced well-mannered adults or simply generations adept at hiding their real thoughts behind polite masks. The governess plays her role in this performance too. She drills children in posture, penmanship, and polite speech, ensuring her charges won't embarrass their parents when they step into society. A governess could make or break a family's reputation. Well-trained children reflected directly on household respectability. Games, when permitted, often doubled as lessons in self-control. Even a round of musical chairs was framed as practice in grace under pressure. And though laughter was allowed, it was always expected to be modest, never raucous. The sound of a child shrieking with glee in public would make nearby matrons purse their lips tighter than their corsets. And yet, beneath all this stiffness, children found ways to be children. They whispered behind staircases, shared secret jokes, and sometimes rebelled in small, delicious acts of mischief. One diary recalls a boy deliberately misusing his soup spoon at dinner just to provoke his governess's horrified gasp. He later confessed it was the most fun he'd had all week. You watch as the young girl across from you lowers her teacup without spilling a drop, then folds her hands primly in her lap. She looks like she's auditioning for adulthood, and in truth, she is. In Victorian England, childhood isn't a rehearsal for life, it's the first act. Congratulations, you've just witnessed the making of tomorrow's polite society, drilled one curtsy and spoonful at a time. The children have retreated upstairs, governess in tow, and now you step outside once more into the bustle of the city. But here comes another trap. What happens when women step into public spaces? For men, promenading down the pavement or lounging at a club is expected. For women, every outing, whether a stroll in the park, a shopping trip, or a visit to the theater, becomes a tightrope walk between visibility and virtue. You accompany a lady down Regent Street, parasol in hand, and instantly feel the invisible weight of eyes upon her. The width of her skirt alone commands attention, sweeping nearly half the pavement. She glides with practiced composure, aware that every passerby is measuring her dignity. You, walking beside her, must keep pace and remember your role. Attentive, protective, but never obtrusive. Mainstream fact: Victorian women in public were bound by a web of expectations. A lady was supposed to dress modestly but fashionably, acknowledge acquaintances with a slight nod, and avoid drawing attention to herself. Respectable women were never to be seen loitering or wandering aimlessly. Purpose and propriety had to guide every step. To sit alone on a park bench too long could invite gossip about your character. Quirky tidbit. In some guides, even umbrella use had rules. A lady should never twirl her parasol, lest she appear frivolous, nor angle it in a way that suggested flirtation. One wag noted that the parasol in careless hands can become a dangerous weapon of coquetry. Imagine a stern etiquette tutor wagging a finger at the sight of a young woman spinning her umbrella just for fun. Shopping, too, carried risks. Women could browse, but were expected to show restraint. Haggling was frowned upon, as it implied vulgar familiarity with money. Purchases had to be made calmly, with a delicate touch, and parcels carried discreetly. Too many packages under one's arms suggested greed. Historians still argue whether most middle-class women actually followed these prescriptions, or whether bustling city life forced them into more practical behaviors. And then there is the matter of escorts. A lady alone in certain districts was viewed with suspicion. An unchaperoned walk could brand her reckless, or worse, immodest. Respectable women were expected to be accompanied by husbands, brothers, or female companions. Even the distance between men and women mattered. Too close, and tongues wagged. Too far, and you risked appearing inattentive. The double standard is obvious. Men might stop at a tavern, stride into clubs, or linger in smoky railway carriages without so much as a raised eyebrow. Women, meanwhile, were hemmed in by invisible lines. To transgress them wasn't merely a personal choice, it was an offense to the entire family's reputation. You pass through Hyde Park, where carriages circle in stately procession and ladies parade along Rotten Row. Here, visibility is everything. A fashionable promenade was less about exercise and more about displaying oneself like a carefully arranged bouquet, seen, admired, but never touched. The irony is sharp. Outside, soot, smells, and shouting children swirl in chaos, but a lady's steps must remain serene, measured, untouchable. You glance at your companion, her face calm beneath her bonnet, her gloves spotless despite the mud. She knows the rules better than you ever could, because for her, they are survival itself. Congratulations. You've escorted a Victorian lady through public space without scandal. Just remember, it wasn't the mud, the crowds, or the horses that posed the greatest danger. It was society's gaze, weighing every move like a judge with an invisible gavel. The stroll through Hyde Park fades into memory, but for many Victorians, adventure extended far beyond London's smoky streets. Travel itself became a social performance, and the rules only multiplied once you set foot abroad. Whether it was a grand tour of Europe, a seaside holiday in France, or even a journey farther afield, you had to carry not only your luggage, but your manners, because nothing was judged more harshly than a traveler who made the English look uncivilized. You picture yourself stepping off a steamer onto the quays of Calais. The air smells of salt and coal smoke. Gulls wheel above and your boots clatter on the gangplank. Already the performance begins. How do you address the porters? How much do you tip without looking miserly or foolishly extravagant? Even abroad, you must display the poise of a proper Victorian. Mainstream fact. By the mid-19th century, railways and steamships had made travel faster and more accessible, particularly for the growing middle classes. Guidebooks like Murray's and later Baedeker's became indispensable, offering not only directions and sights, but instructions on how to behave. One Murray's guide sternly advised Britons to avoid noisy displays of astonishment, lest they mark themselves as rustic provincials. Quirky tidbit. Some etiquette writers warned travelers against eating garlic abroad, lest they acquire foreign habits that would shock their countrymen back home. Imagine refusing a delicious plate of Provençal food, not because you disliked it, but because you feared your breath might brand you as suspiciously continental. Historians still argue whether these warnings reflected genuine social concern or merely fed English anxieties about foreignness. In Italy, you must admire the ruins with solemn awe, never rushing or posing dramatically. In Switzerland, you may gaze at mountains but must resist gushing too much. It suggests emotional excess, a trait unbefitting a calm English soul. And heaven help you in France, where even your pronunciation is judged. Too authentic, and you appear pretentious. Too clumsy, and you sound uncultured. At the hotel, you must behave with equal restraint. Speak softly, keep your belongings neat, and never haggle over the bill. Complaining too loudly risks confirming the stereotype of the boorish Englishman abroad. At meals, you must adapt just enough to local customs to show flexibility, but not so much that you seem to abandon your own identity. It's a delicate balance. One foot in Englishness, one in cosmopolitan politeness. Letters home are part of the ritual too. Travelers were expected to write lengthy accounts of their journeys, filled with observations that demonstrated not only taste but moral lessons. The ruins of Rome remind us of the fleeting nature of empire. You might write, hoping Aunt Mildred admires your wisdom. These letters weren't just correspondence. They were performances of cultural refinement. And then, of course, there's luggage. A gentleman must never carry his own trunk. That's what porters are for. A lady's hat boxes multiply like rabbits, each one demanding delicate handling. Arriving at a hotel with too few trunks suggests poverty. Too many, and you look vulgar. The correct number is a mystery known only to the gods of etiquette. The irony is that while you're fussing about appearances, real adventure lurks all around. Bustling markets, new flavors, unfamiliar languages. Yet for a Victorian, the priority is not discovery, it's dignity. You must return home not only with souvenirs, but with your reputation intact, admired as a traveler of refinement, rather than dismissed as one who embarrassed us in Florence. As the steamer whistle blows, you glance at your immaculate gloves, your carefully folded guidebook, and your absurdly heavy trunk. The world is vast, but the rules follow you wherever you go. Congratulations, you've survived Victorian travel abroad. You may not have tasted the garlic, but at least you didn't disgrace yourself in front of the Alps. You return from your European travels feeling weary but smug. You've managed not to disgrace England by eating garlic in public or mispronouncing merci. Yet now your social duties extend even farther afield, for the Victorian age is the age of empire, and encounters with colonial subjects, whether in India, Africa, or the Pacific, come tangled with their own rules. This is not travel for leisure, it's travel with politics lurking in every polite bow. You picture yourself stepping off a ship in Calcutta. The air is hot and humid, spiced with cardamom and dust, and instantly your stiff English collar feels like a torture device. Yet etiquette demands you maintain composure. Sweating is permitted, complaining is not. You must act as though wool suits were designed for the tropics, even as the fabric glues itself to your skin. Mainstream fact: by the mid-19th century, Britain's empire sprawled across the globe, and administrators, soldiers, missionaries, and their families found themselves navigating cultural encounters daily. The official line demanded dignity and reserve, presenting Britons as firm but civil rulers. Manuals advised colonials to uphold propriety in dress, speech, and manners as representatives of the crown. One officer wrote, "We were expected to embody England even when England melted off our brows in the Indian sun." Quirky tidbit: some etiquette books advised Britons abroad never to eat with their hands, even when local custom dictated it. Forks and knives were to be insisted upon, despite the absurdity of trying to spear rice with a pronged instrument. To go native, even slightly, risked whispers that you had lost your Englishness. Historians still argue whether these rules reflected real practice, or whether many colonials quietly adapted in private, all while performing rigidity in public. Social interactions were delicate. With fellow Europeans, you maintained strict hierarchies of rank and formality. With local elites, you were expected to show a cautious blend of respect and distance. Bow too low, and you looked weak. Bow too little, and you appeared arrogant. Accepting a gift demanded elaborate gestures of gratitude without seeming greedy. Declining one risked causing deep offense. It was diplomacy disguised as dinner. Even the daily ritual of tea changed meaning here. In London, it was a symbol of refinement. In India, offering tea became a performance of empire itself, a way of blending British rituals with colonial production. You sip your cup, aware that every drop of Darjeeling is freighted with politics, trade, and power. Back in England, your behavior abroad will be scrutinized. Tales filter home, who fraternized too freely, who treated locals with disdain, who adapted too eagerly. Your reputation doesn't just travel with you, it precedes you, carried in letters and gossip across oceans. The irony is sharp. Surrounded by ancient civilizations, bustling markets, and cultures rich with traditions, you're expected not to learn too much, not to bend too far, but to maintain your role as a walking emblem of England. The stiff collar is more than clothing. It's a symbol, an unyielding reminder that you must be English everywhere, even when your skin begs for linen and your soul craves curry. You wipe your brow discreetly, adjust your gloves, and remind yourself of the golden rule of Victorian colonial etiquette. Adapt just enough to function, but never enough to look like you belong. Congratulations, you've survived the social acrobatics of the empire's edges. Whether you've gained wisdom or only mosquito bites, society back home will judge you less on what you experienced and more on whether you remembered to sip your tea like an Englishman in the blazing sun. You return from the colonies with your starch, dignity, and tact, but no amount of empire swagger shields you from one of the most relentless tests of Victorian society: mourning. Death is not just a private sorrow, it's a public ritual, governed by rules as precise as any dinner table seating plan. Lose a loved one, and suddenly your wardrobe, your schedule, even your social invitations are dictated by the etiquette of grief. The black crepe appears almost instantly. For women, mourning begins with heavy veils, long dresses dyed in deep matte black, and jewelry made of jet or even woven from the deceased's hair. Men, by comparison, have it easier. A black armband or a dark suit will do. Yet it is women who bear the brunt of mourning spectacle, their sorrow literally stitched into their seams. Mainstream fact: Victorian mourning customs were famously elaborate, with etiquette books prescribing precise timelines. A widow, for instance, was expected to wear full mourning for 1 year and 1 day, followed by half mourning in muted grays and purples for another year. Socializing was limited, music avoided, and bright colors forbidden. Fail to observe the proper stages, and tongues would wag that you were heartless, or worse, indecently eager to move on. Quirky tidbit: some families even ordered mourning stationery, with black borders printed around the edges of letters to signal bereavement. The thickness of the border sometimes reflected the closeness of the loss, a sort of paper-based barometer of grief. Historians still argue whether these customs truly reflected deep emotion or whether they had hardened into mere social performance, a way of displaying propriety rather than genuine sorrow. You attend a funeral and feel the weight of silence pressing down. Even your footsteps must be measured. Ladies fan themselves discreetly behind veils. Men bow their heads solemnly, and children are expected to whisper at most. Mourning, like everything else in Victorian life, is choreographed. And then comes the question of invitations. Can you attend a dinner party while in mourning? Only after the proper interval. Accept too soon, and society may decide your grief is shallow. Refuse too long, and you risk seeming reclusive. It's a balancing act between sorrow and sociability, grief and gossip. The irony of it all? While mourning rituals claim to honor the dead, they often became burdens on the living. A widow trapped in years of restrictive dress and isolation might feel more entombed than her late husband, and yet to step outside the rules was to invite scandal, as though society feared cheerful widows more than death itself. At last, you glance down at your attire, the heavy fabric absorbing light, the veil itching against your skin. You realize grief here is not just an emotion but a uniform, a declaration to the world that you are respectable even in sorrow. Congratulations, you've made it through the first stage of mourning. Whether your heart is broken or simply weary, society has made sure your grief is stitched, inked, and paraded for all to see. The mourning clothes still hang heavy in your wardrobe, but now you face the other side of Victorian etiquette, the blunders. For all the strict rules, the endless manuals, and the whispered reminders, no one gets it right all the time. And when you fail, society remembers. Welcome to the cruel world of social faux pas, where one misstep can haunt you longer than any scandal in the newspapers. Saad, you step into a parlor one afternoon, confident after weeks of practice. You've mastered the bow, the fork, even the language of flowers. Surely nothing can go wrong now. But then you sit too heavily, and the fragile chair creaks ominously. The room freezes. You didn't break it, thank heaven, but you've committed a small crime: inelegance. Your name may not make the scandal sheets, but you can be sure someone will tell the story over tea tomorrow, with a chuckle about how our poor friend sat as though he were a dock worker. Mainstream fact: social blunders, or faux pas, were feared because they undermined the illusion of refinement. Etiquette wasn't just about rules, it was about creating a seamless image of composure. A dropped teacup, a mispronounced word in French, even laughing too loudly could mark you as vulgar. Manuals sternly warned that recovery mattered as much as the mistake itself. You were expected to smile calmly, as though nothing had happened, and glide on with dignity. Quirky tidbit: one etiquette writer claimed that sneezing more than twice in a row at dinner was highly improper, as it drew undue attention. Imagine the horror of an unfortunate guest caught in a hay fever fit, sneezing themselves straight out of the invitation list. Historians still argue whether households truly blacklisted people for such trivialities, or whether this was just another way to sell etiquette books. The traps are endless. Forgetting to remove your hat indoors, introducing two people in the wrong order, ladies first, then gentlemen, ranked by age and status. Addressing a knight as Mr., using the wrong spoon at dessert. Each slip is tiny, but each reveals, to watchful eyes, a supposed crack in your respectability. And gossip is merciless. A young man who once accidentally called his hostess by the wrong name might be teased for decades. A woman who curtsied at the wrong moment in a royal procession was immortalized as the one who bent twice. These weren't simple mistakes, they were marks stamped into reputations. Your own turn comes when a servant offers you sherry before dinner. Distracted, you take it with your left hand. Instantly, a murmur runs through the room. Nothing is said outright, but you can feel the silent tally. One mark against you. You force a smile, take a sip, and pretend not to notice. That is, after all, the only way to recover. Act as though the blunder never occurred. The irony is cruel. Victorian etiquette created rules so minute and arbitrary that breaking them was inevitable. Society thrived on these slips because gossip needs fuel. And so the entire system was less about perfection and more about performance. You didn't have to be flawless. You just had to make your flaws entertaining enough for others to repeat. You leave the evening slightly shaken but strangely relieved. You've blundered and survived. The whispers will circulate, yes, but in time someone else will sit too heavily in a chair or sneeze 3 times in a row. The cycle of faux pas is eternal. Congratulations, you've committed your first real blunder. Wear it lightly. In Victorian society, mistakes aren't just embarrassing, they're the glue that holds gossip together. You've blundered, recovered, and endured the whispers, but Victorian society never lets you rest. Tonight, you're invited to a gathering where the rules of etiquette blur into something stranger. An evening where science, superstition, and social ritual intermingle. The Victorians loved progress, railways, telegraphs, electric lights, yet they also adored seances, ghost stories, and cures that involved more quackery than medicine. And naturally, even these eccentricities came wrapped in manners. The parlor is dimly lit, curtains drawn, the fire casting long shadows. Guests gather around a table, voices hushed with anticipation. A medium prepares the space, perhaps with a dramatic flourish of hands. You glance around. Everyone looks deadly serious, as though they're about to witness history, not parlor trickery. You're tempted to laugh, but you mustn't. In Victorian company, even skepticism has rules. Mainstream fact: the mid to late 19th century saw an explosion of interest in spiritualism. Seances, table turning, and spirit photography became fashionable pastimes, particularly among the upper and middle classes. The appeal lay partly in grief. Families devastated by high mortality rates longed to believe they could communicate with lost loved ones. For many, attending a seance was as respectable as attending the theater. Quirky tidbit: some seance circles even had etiquette about who could touch the table. Participants were instructed to place hands lightly, without gripping too hard, lest they be accused of faking the mysterious movements. One writer insisted that chewing loudly during a seance could disturb the vibrations. Imagine suppressing a sneeze while trying not to rattle the spirits. You sit with your fingertips poised, watching as the table creaks and shivers. Someone gasps. Was it a ghost, or just the butler shifting his weight on the floorboards? Historians still argue whether most Victorians were genuinely convinced by spiritualism, or whether many treated it as a fashionable diversion, half believed but fully enjoyed. And it's not just ghosts. Science itself was seeping into etiquette. Phrenology, reading bumps on the skull, was sometimes discussed in polite company, with hosts inviting experts to map their guests' personalities. It was equal parts science, entertainment, and flattery, though heaven forbid someone announce your skull-revealed stubbornness at the tea table. Even medicine carried its own manners. A polite Victorian might quietly swallow a tonic laced with alcohol or opium, smile serenely, and remark only that it was refreshing. To complain openly about ailments was frowned upon. One was expected to suffer with restraint. Yet behind the curtains, bottles of patent medicine promised miracle cures for everything from indigestion to nervous exhaustion. You sip a glass of sherry as the medium calls for silence. A draft brushes your cheek, the candles flicker, and someone swears they hear a whisper from beyond. You nod solemnly, playing along. To scoff would be impolite, even if you suspect the whisper is only the maid moving in the hallway. The seance ends with murmured awe, and you file out into the gaslit street, the chill night air smelling faintly of coal smoke. You realize you've just participated in a ritual that balanced on the knife edge between belief and performance, just like everything else in Victorian society. Congratulations. You've survived the strange intersection of science, superstition, and etiquette. You may not believe in ghosts, but you've learned the first rule of seances: never cough during the spirit's big entrance. The ghostly whispers of the seance fade into memory, but the social calendar never sleeps. Tonight, you're not haunting a parlor with mediums. You're dining out, venturing into the growing world of hotels, restaurants, and public eateries. At home, you may control the table settings, but here you're on foreign ground, where a misplaced order or a poorly timed spoon can spell embarrassment. Dining in public is less about food and more about showing the world that you can maintain grace under scrutiny. You step into a hotel dining room, chandeliers glowing, silver cutlery gleaming, waiters gliding silently across the carpet. The smell of roast beef mingles with coal smoke drifting in from the street. Other guests glance up as you enter, and instantly you remember. Even the act of walking to your table must project quiet dignity. Mainstream fact: though restaurants existed earlier, the Victorian era saw their popularity surge, particularly in big cities. Hotels like the Savoy in London or grand establishments in Paris became temples of public dining. For the rising middle classes, eating in such places wasn't just nourishment. It was a chance to display refinement in front of strangers. Manuals even included chapters on public dining etiquette, reminding readers that their behavior reflected not just themselves, but their nation. Quirky tidbit: one etiquette guide warned diners never to summon a waiter by snapping fingers or raising a hand too abruptly. Instead, The proper signal was a subtle incline of the head or the faintest lift of a finger. Anything more direct risked being branded vulgar. Historians still argue whether waiters actually appreciated these delicate signals or simply preferred a good clear shout from across the room. The waiter presents a menu. You mustn't take too long. Indecision is impolite. But neither must you rush. And when you order, pronounce each dish correctly, especially the French ones. Mispronouncing bouillabaisse might earn you pitying glances. Pronouncing it too perfectly might make you look pretentious. Best to aim somewhere in the muddy middle, as though French just happens to tumble naturally from your lips. As the meal begins, remember the rules of home still apply. Napkin across your lap, cutlery from the outside in, no slurping, no chewing with your mouth open. But here, there's an added layer. You are being watched. Every other diner is a potential judge, cataloging your movements for later gossip. Even the way you butter your roll, piece by piece, never the whole, becomes a statement of character. Wine arrives. The proper etiquette is to sip modestly, never drain the glass. If you don't drink, decline politely but firmly, without offering moral lectures. To refuse too brusquely risks offending the host, or worse, making others self-conscious about their own indulgence. Then comes the challenge of payment. In many restaurants, especially abroad, gentlemen were expected to settle the bill discreetly. Pulling out coins and counting them openly is gauche. The refined way is to pass the money folded with minimal fuss. Tip generously enough to show gratitude, but not so generously that you appear to be flaunting wealth. Too little marks you stingy. Too much makes you look like a vulgar show-off. And what of conversation? Keep your voice low, laughter soft. A booming guffaw in a hotel dining room brands you instantly as common. One etiquette writer scolded, "He who fills the room with his mirth fills it also with contempt." You find yourself chuckling under your breath, careful not to let the sound escape too forcefully. The meal ends and you rise, chair tucked neatly back, napkin folded discreetly on the table. You offer a slight nod to the waiter as you depart, nothing more, nothing less. Outside, the city roars with its usual chaos, but inside that dining room, you've passed another test, proving that even when the food isn't your own, the manners must be. Congratulations, you've dined out Victorian style, without scandal, without slurping, and without snapping for service. Somewhere, an etiquette writer would be proud. The polished hotel dining room fades behind you, but society never lets you rest. Tonight, it's not about solemn dinners or hushed seances, it's about leisure. But don't be fooled. In Victorian England, even fun is bound by rules. Picnics, parlor games, seaside holidays, all promise relaxation, yet each comes with its own tangled etiquette. You're about to discover that even laughter must be measured, even joy choreographed. The picnic basket rattles in the carriage as you bump along toward Hampstead Heath. The weather is clear, for once, the grass damp but tolerable, and soon rugs are spread across the ground, plates and cutlery unpacked. Do you flop down carelessly? Absolutely not. Gentlemen must lower themselves with steady restraint. Ladies must arrange skirts to avoid scandalous displays of ankles. A picnic may feel rustic, but refinement still hovers like a watchful chaperone. Mainstream fact, the Victorian era witnessed a boom in leisure activities, thanks to railways opening up parks, resorts, and seaside towns. Families and friends escaped the city grime for fresh air, yet etiquette remained central. Manuals offered entire chapters on outdoor propriety, reminding readers that even the countryside did not excuse vulgar behavior. Sure, quirky tidbit. One etiquette guide warned ladies not to eat sandwiches too hastily at a picnic, as excessive eagerness for bread betrays a want of refinement. Imagine sitting cross-legged on the grass, stomach rumbling, and having to nibble at cucumber slices as though auditioning for a porcelain doll convention. Historians still argue whether anyone genuinely obeyed these rural restrictions, or whether most people gleefully ignored them once they were out of sight of townhouses. Games too were governed by rules. In the parlor, charades and word games were common, but participants were expected to avoid overly dramatic gestures. Guessing death with a flamboyant pantomime of stabbing yourself? Too crude. Laughter must be soft, smiles genteel. Even when playing Blind Man's Buff, a game that almost guarantees chaos, ladies were advised to move gracefully, never lunging wildly lest they knock over a lamp. At the seaside, etiquette followed you right into the waves. Bathing machines, little wooden huts on wheels, allowed women to enter the water unseen, preserving modesty. Emerging in anything less than a full bathing gown was scandalous. Gentlemen, meanwhile, swam separately, or pretended to, often bobbing about politely while trying not to gasp at the cold. Historians still argue whether seaside etiquette was universally enforced, or whether working-class holidaymakers, freed from the eyes of the elite, laughed louder, swam freer, and ignored half the rules. Diaries suggest both worlds coexisted: rigid rituals on Brighton's fashionable beaches, exuberant chaos on humbler shores. You sit on the picnic rug, balancing a plate of cold chicken and tarts, and realize how exhausting fun can be. You mustn't spill, mustn't laugh too loudly, mustn't stain your gloves with jam. Leisure, it turns out, is just another stage for displaying refinement. As the sun dips, the rugs are folded, baskets packed, and you return to the city. You've played your role well, smiling softly at games, nibbling sandwiches without wolfing them down, and managing not to scandalize anyone with your posture. Congratulations, you've survived Victorian leisure. You may not feel rested, but at least you look respectable, which in this age is the only kind of relaxation society allows. The memory of picnics and seaside breezes still lingers, but tonight, you're back in a stuffy parlor where the air is thick not with sea salt, but with opinions. Politics has crept into the drawing room, and you must tread carefully. This is not the raucous shouting of Parliament or the blunt debating of a tavern. In polite Victorian society, politics is spoken in careful tones, hedged with caveats and wrapped in the silk of etiquette. You take a seat near the fire, a glass of sherry in hand. Someone mentions the latest debate in the Commons, and instantly ears prick up. Do you launch into a tirade about reform, empire, or trade? Dangerous. Too much passion marks you as uncouth. Too little, and you appear ignorant. The challenge is to hover in the middle, thoughtful, measured, never straying into controversy. Mainstream fact: politics was central to Victorian life, yet conversation about it in mixed company was delicate. Gentlemen might discuss the Reform Acts or foreign policy at their clubs, but in parlors, the focus shifted to polite commentary. The rule was to demonstrate awareness without inviting argument. A safe remark about the vigor of Mr. Gladstone's speeches, or Her Majesty's steady example, was always welcome. Quirky tidbit: some etiquette guides actually advised women to avoid political conversation altogether, lest they appear unfeminine. Yet diaries reveal that many women were highly engaged, discussing empire, suffrage, and reform in private circles. Historians still argue whether women's supposed silence was reality, or merely a myth perpetuated by etiquette books written by men who preferred their opinions unstated. You lean forward cautiously, offering a neutral remark about railway expansion and how it benefits commerce and comfort alike. Nods all around, safe. A gentleman beside you mutters darkly about colonial unrest, but you let the comment drift away, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. Another guest praises Disraeli's wit. You smile politely, even if you haven't read his latest speech. In this game, the goal is not victory but survival. Religion, of course, is even more perilous. Best avoided unless you're certain everyone shares your view. One ill-placed comment about Darwin or the Church of England could chill the room faster than an open window in January. And so, you redirect the conversation to literature, perhaps quoting a line from Tennyson. Poetry, after all, is safer ground. Still lofty, still impressive, but less likely to trigger scandal. The irony, as always, is rich. Outside these parlors, politics shapes daily life. Factories roar, railways cut through landscapes, protests stir in the streets. Yet here, among velvet chairs and porcelain vases, politics is reduced to a whisper, a parlor trick of appearing informed without actually taking risks. You sip your sherry, nodding at the appropriate intervals, your voice a steady hum of polite platitudes. You've mastered the art of sounding engaged while saying almost nothing at all. Congratulations. You've survived Victorian parlor politics. You may not have changed the world, but at least you didn't offend anyone, which in this society is victory enough. The sherry glass is empty, the parlor conversation about Gladstone has fizzled, and now another minefield opens: money. If politics is dangerous, money is nearly fatal. Victorians talked endlessly about wealth, yet they rarely admitted to it. Fortunes were displayed in clothing, furniture, and houses, but mentioning the actual numbers was taboo. You must learn to signal prosperity without ever speaking its name. You sit at a tea table beside a merchant's wife. She gestures casually to her new lace cuffs, and everyone murmurs polite admiration. No one asks how much they cost. That would be vulgar. Instead, you must compliment the workmanship, the fineness, the elegance. The price hangs invisibly in the air, understood but unsaid. Like a ghost, everyone pretends not to see. Mainstream fact: Victorian society revolved around class and wealth, but direct talk of money was frowned upon in polite circles. Gentlemen never discussed their salaries. Ladies never admitted how much their gowns cost. Yet fortunes built on industry and trade reshaped society. Middle-class drivers flaunted prosperity through carriages, servants, and fashionable addresses while pretending it was all effortless. Quirky tidbit: some etiquette guides advise never to ask how much rent someone paid, but it was perfectly acceptable to speculate about it behind their backs. Diaries reveal dinner parties where guests whispered estimates of each other's incomes with the intensity of horse race betting. Historians still argue whether this hypocrisy was universal or whether some households, particularly in the industrial North, were more blunt about wealth. Meanwhile, bills and debts lurked in the background. To speak of them openly was to break the spell of refinement. Even businessmen preferred to cloak transactions in euphemisms. He is comfortable might mean wealthy. He is in difficulties meant ruin. Everyone knew, but no one said. At the same time, charity provided a safe outlet for displaying money. Donations to hospitals, churches, and schools were praised, so long as they were delivered with humility. A benefactor who boasted too much risked being labeled ostentatious. Yet the charitable ball, with its glittering gowns and orchestras, was itself a stage for wealth disguised as virtue. You shift in your seat, listening as the conversation flows delicately around fortunes. Someone mentions a new railway investment, but in careful terms. It has promise. No figures, no sums. Another guest speaks of expanding interest abroad. Everyone nods sagely, each pretending to understand while quietly calculating what it really means. The irony, of course, is that money is everywhere. In the coal that powers the lamps, the carriages outside, the gowns rustling in the parlor. It fuels every layer of Victorian life, yet to mention it outright is to risk vulgarity. You smile, sip your tea, and murmur something about sound investments, tutsits, hoping no one asks for details. Congratulations, you've survived a Victorian conversation about money by saying almost nothing at all. In this world, silence is golden and more respectable than gold itself. The parlor grows quiet, and as the lamps flicker low, another kind of etiquette rises to the surface. Quieter, ink-stained, and just as perilous, the art of correspondence. In Victorian society, letters are not merely communication. They are social currency, proof of refinement, and occasionally weapons sharper than any sword. One misphrased line, one blot of ink, and your reputation may wobble like a poorly balanced teacup. You sit at a mahogany desk, the smell of sealing wax in the air, sheets of crisp paper before you. The pen scratches steadily, each word weighed as though it were a legal contract. Do you begin with "Dear Madam" or "My dearest friend"? Titles and salutations must be exact, reflecting not only respect but the degree of intimacy allowed. A "Dear Sir" is polite. A "My dear sir" risks over-familiarity. The line between warmth and impropriety is as thin as the ink drying on your page. Mainstream fact: the Victorians were prodigious letter writers. With postal reforms in the 1840s making postage affordable, daily correspondence flourished. Lovers, families, business partners, and friends exchanged reams of letters, and etiquette manuals provided endless advice on tone, structure, and propriety. A well-written letter was considered a mirror of character. Sloppy grammar suggested sloppy morals. Quirky tidbit: some etiquette guides even instructed writers on how to fold and seal letters. Folding too hastily implied carelessness. Sealing with red wax instead of black might be read as disrespect during mourning. Even the angle of a signature mattered. Slanted too dramatically, it could be mistaken for vanity. Historians still argue whether people truly obsessed over such details or whether publishers exaggerated to keep selling how-to manuals. You finish your salutation and move to the body of the letter. Gossip, dangerous, compliments, safe so long as they're not too effusive. Business-like brevity is expected for acquaintances. Flowing sentiment is reserved for intimates, and even then, restraint must reign. To pour out your heart too fully risks your words being read aloud in another parlor, dissected like a frog in a schoolroom. Then there is the matter of handwriting. Flourishes may look elegant, but too many curls in your YY suggest frivolity. Too cramped a script looks mean-spirited. You must aim for that perfect middle ground, legible, graceful, neither vain nor stingy. And once the letter is sealed, the envelope itself carries signals. Heavy cream paper with a watermark suggests wealth. Thin paper folded twice may hint at thrift. The address must be written with care, never smudged, and always including proper titles. To leave off a Mrs. or Esq is to insult the recipient before they even slit the seal. Finally, the delivery. A letter is not complete until it is received gracefully. The recipient, upon opening it, is expected to respond promptly. Delay too long and you appear neglectful. Reply too quickly and you risk looking over-eager. Timing, like everything else, is a balancing act. The irony is that in a world drowning in letters, most were banal, discussions of weather, health, and small domestic details. Yet every sentence had to be dressed in etiquette, as though even describing the rain required moral backbone. You sand your page to dry the ink, fold it neatly, and press your seal into warm wax. There it is, your reputation, bound in paper, ready to be judged. Congratulations. You've survived the gauntlet of Victorian correspondence. Now pray, the postman doesn't drop your careful letter into a puddle. The ink on your letter is barely dry, yet already you sense the ripple of whispers. Because in Victorian society, words don't simply stay on the page. They sprout wings, flutter into parlors, and transform into gossip. Reputation here is as fragile as porcelain, and gossip is the hammer always hovering above it. To live under these rules is to understand that your life isn't private. It's a story retold in fragments, embroidered with speculation, and served with tea. You arrive at a friend's drawing room one afternoon, the clink of cups punctuating low voices. Instantly you recognize the cadence. Someone is being discussed, not condemned outright, oh no, that would be vulgar, but examined in the gentle, relentless tones of concern. You lean closer, catching words like "I hear" and "they say." The subject of these phrases is absent, of course, but their reputation is present in every syllable. A mainstream fact: gossip wasn't merely idle chatter, it was a central mechanism of Victorian society. With no social media, no tabloids, at least not in the modern sense, reputation was sustained through conversation. Invitations, marriages, even careers could be won or lost based on the whisper network of drawing rooms. Etiquette manuals acknowledged it obliquely, warning readers to guard their name as they would their purse. Quirky tidbit: some women's magazines published entire gossip columns disguised as moral advice, hinting at scandals while pretending to condemn them. One journal scolded a lady for wearing lilac during half mourning, while gleefully spreading the news of her fashion faux pas. Historians still argue whether gossip served more as a weapon of exclusion or as a glue binding communities together. You sip your tea quietly, hoping the subject doesn't turn toward you, yet you know how fragile safety is. A misplaced glance at last week's ball, an enthusiastic laugh in the wrong corner of the room, even a rumor about debts unpaid, any of these could set your name afloat on the currents of talk. And once afloat, it is nearly impossible to sink gossip back down. What makes it dangerous is its subtlety. No one calls you dishonorable to your face. Instead, they phrase it gently. I do worry about his judgment. Or, she seems rather free with her laughter. Soft words, devastating impact. A dinner invitation quietly withdrawn, a marriage prospect suddenly cold, a seat at the table no longer offered. Your social death doesn't come with a guillotine, it comes with a smile. And gossip spreads in unexpected directions. Servants overhear conversations, carry them to other households, and before long, your minor slip is a major anecdote in half of London. In this world, even the butler polishing glasses may be an unintentional journalist. You glance around the room, heart beating faster. You laugh politely at the anecdote being told, though you suspect the moral of the story is meant as a warning. Reputation here is not what you think of yourself. It is what others murmur when you leave. The irony, while gossip is condemned as shallow, it is also irresistible. Parlors thrive on it. Friendships are forged through shared whispers, and boredom is banished by dissecting the lives of others. Everyone fears it, but everyone feeds it. You finish your tea, stand gracefully, and bow your farewell. As you leave, you wonder, will your name remain untouched tonight, or will your walk out the door provide the next whispered tale? Congratulations, you've survived a Victorian gossip session without becoming the headline. At least not yet. The whispers fade behind you, but the truth is clear. You can never fully escape the gaze of Victorian society. And yet, as the century wanes, you begin to sense change in the air. The rules that once pressed down like iron stays are loosening, little by little, as the world shifts toward the Edwardian age. The corset of etiquette, literal and metaphorical, begins to unlace. You walk along a London street in the 1890s and notice subtle differences. Skirts are still long, collars still high, but there is a faint relaxation in the air. Young women are riding bicycles, with skirts adapted for movement. Families are taking more holidays by train, embracing leisure without the same strict formality. Even tea, though still a ritual, feels less like a battlefield and more like a comfortable habit. Mainstream fact: by the end of the Victorian era, many of the strictest codes of etiquette were softening. Industrial wealth had created a vast middle class less concerned with aristocratic ritual and more interested in practical respectability. Meanwhile, campaigns for women's rights and educational reform chipped away at rigid gender roles. What had once been unthinkable, women speaking in public, men appearing without hats, was slowly becoming ordinary. Quirky tidbit: one magazine in the 1890s poked fun at outdated etiquette rules by publishing cartoons of young women defiantly eating sandwiches whole without breaking them into pieces. A joke, yes, but also a sign that people were growing weary of microscopic rules. Historians still argue whether this decline was felt evenly across society, or whether the aristocracy clung longer to rigid codes while the middle classes moved faster toward informality. You glance at your gloves and realize that fewer people are wearing them now. Calling cards still exist, but they no longer carry the same absolute power. Mourning rules, once measured down to the month, are being shortened. Gossip still flows, but in a society increasingly saturated with newspapers and illustrated weeklies, reputations are being shaped more by print than by parlors. The irony is sweet. After decades of suffocating rules, the world is tilting toward something lighter. Yet for you, trained in bows and spoons, in calling cards and parasols, the shift is disorienting. You've spent your life mastering rituals that suddenly feel a little old-fashioned. You walk through the foggy streets wondering if you should cling to the safety of tradition or loosen your collar and embrace the winds of change. Congratulations, you've reached the final chapter of Victorian social rules. The empire still hums, the factories still roar, but the etiquette that defined an era is fading into history. What comes next belongs to another age. And now, as the last lamp of the Victorian age flickers out in your imagination, let's soften everything. The streets quiet, the fog thins, and the constant weight of etiquette finally drifts away. You can loosen your collar, let go of the gloves, and breathe. The endless rules, the bows, the curtsies, the folded calling cards, the silent spoons, recede like waves pulling back from the shore. Picture yourself in a quiet drawing room, the fire glowing low, the sound of distant carriages fading into silence. The chairs no longer matter, the table settings no longer matter. The air is calm, warm, forgiving. You stretch your legs without fear of scandal. You lean back without worry, and you find that the world has slowed to the pace of your breath. The city outside dozes, soot and smoke settling into sleep. Within, your mind drifts lazily across everything you've endured. The dinners, the teas, the dances, the secrets. All of it softens now, blending into the gentle hum of history. No eyes watch you, no whispers chase you. For the first time, you are free of the gaze that never blinked. Let the rules melt into dreams. The stiff collars become clouds. The rustle of skirts becomes a breeze. The clinking of cups becomes a lullaby, faint and steady. You are drifting, not through fog and gaslight now, but through calm and quiet, wrapped in a blanket of stillness. So close your eyes, sink into that softness, and let the story dissolve into sleep. The Victorians can keep their rules, you at last can simply rest.